Hello YouTube, welcome back to the Card Combo Show with me, Chocobilly, where we look at the weird and wonderful card combinations in the Final Fantasy TCG. And in episode 61, we're going to be looking at forwards with action abilities, which is something you don't see a huge amount of, because generally when they have action abilities, the forwards are more vulnerable and therefore don't get played as much. They become a lot more like monsters, as in that they are tools just to be used and won't really be much of the attacking force. So, the forwards I'm looking at this week are MOOGLE 6 from Opus 4. Rosa from Opus 14, Esha'ntarl from Opus 12, Hein from Opus 10, and finally Krile from Opus 7. Okay, so first and foremost, MOOGLE 6. If you control 2 or more Category 6 forwards other than MOOGLE 6 cannot be chosen by opponent summons or abilities, and draw 1 card. So, he's a strange card because he's very easy to kill, being that he's only a 4k power and he does cost 3, so he's massively under curve. But the ability to just dull and draw a card is actually pretty good, and he doesn't have any prerequisite there either. It's just dull, draw. Now obviously you can't do that as soon as you play him onto the field, but you know, every turn thereafter he starts gaining you massive value, and it's in that case that your opponent probably wants to start killing him. But he has a form of protection as well, which is also quite nice. So using something like Ghost, it means that you could play MOOGLE onto the field, and then when you do play him onto the field, if you pay 2 ice when Ghost is in your break zone, that then gets played onto the field as well, which then adds to MOOGLE's ability of being able to be protected. Now unfortunately you need 2/6 forwards other than MOOGLE, so you need Ghost and something else, but it means that if you already have something on the field like Terra or Lock, you can play MOOGLE and then pay the 2 ice so that Ghost comes onto the field, and then therefore MOOGLE is protected. Then you've got Ultros, and just like Ultros, he never really wants to go away, and he keeps on coming back. So there are a few Ultros cards in the deck. Now you do need to be careful in the game. You do need to be careful because not all the Ultros cards are actually from Final Fantasy 6. There are a couple that are from Final Fantasy 13 as well, or there's one at least from Final Fantasy 13, so do be careful of that. But still, Ultros obviously can keep on searching himself and playing himself onto the field, or a myriad of other abilities, which will then obviously make MOOGLE a bit harder to kill. Lock. So at the beginning of your main phase 1, reveal top 2 cards of your deck, add 1 category 6 character among them to your hand, and return the other cards to the bottom of your deck in any order. So this is decent because obviously Lock can get you more 6 forwards to hand and then play them onto the field, and not to mention the fact that in a 6 heavy deck, which probably MOOGLE and Lock would be in, it means that MOOGLE's going to be harder to kill, but you also get more cards to hand through both Lock's ability and MOOGLE's ability as well. Then you got Terra. So the cost required for your opponent to cast summons is increased by 1. So not only does MOOGLE have his own kind of built-in protection, but Terra would also make it harder for your opponent to kill any of the forwards on the field as well by increasing their summons cost as well. Rosa, so obviously you can use MOOGLE just to draw you a card, which is pretty good, but Rosa has the ability to just discard a card, draw 1 card. So realistically, or theoretically, you can use MOOGLE and Rosa to be able to draw 2 cards and discard 1. Now obviously you have to use them in the correct order, but, well, I say the correct order, you have to use them differently. You can't just, you know, draw 2 and then discard 1. It has to be, obviously the discard happens first, or at least in the middle after drawing from MOOGLE. But still, it's a good way to be able to just keep on cycling cards that you might want, or getting cards you want in the break zone into the break zone. Easel. So when your opponent casts a summon, activate all the forwards you control. So this basically means with Easel or Ezel, and MOOGLE on the field, every time your opponent casts a summon, you get to draw a card, which is pretty good. And what's decent about this as well is that fact that if your opponent were to cast a summon, say to try and get rid of MOOGLE, Easel's ability would then stack, which would then resolve, then activating MOOGLE, and then you can use MOOGLE's ability again before your opponent's summon would resolve to kill MOOGLE, so you're still getting a card to your hand through MOOGLE anyway. Ash. So, choose 1 character, activate it as one of her abilities when you enter your attack phase, so it means that you can effectively every turn use Ash to reactivate MOOGLE to then draw a card. So if MOOGLE has been on the field for at least a turn, you can use MOOGLE to draw your card, go to attack phase, use Ash to reactivate him, dull him again to draw you another card. So with Ash and MOOGLE on the field, it means that including your draw phase, you're actually drawing 4 cards a turn, which is pretty tasty. And then finally Sarah. Now you could have Sarah and Ash together as well, and you're going to have a whale of a time, because obviously Ash can reactivate MOOGLE, and when Sarah attacks, she reactivates all the job MOOGLE you control as well. So that would mean that you could dull MOOGLE, draw you a card, go to attack phase, using Ash, reactivate MOOGLE, draw you another card, then you attack with Sarah, reactivate MOOGLE, draw you another card, which is hilarious, and you know, MOOGLEs are pretty fun, so why not? Alright, next we have the one and only Krile. So, the cost required to cast your summons can be paid with CP of any element, which is pretty good. When you cast a summon, choose one forward, it gains plus 1000 power until the end of the turn. And finally, discard one summon until the end of the turn. Krile cannot be chosen by your opponent's abilities. So, first and foremost, Graviton. You cast a summon, an Earth summon. Graviton can choose a forward and give it plus 2000 power, and then Krile would also stack on that as well, so then you could choose a forward and give it plus 1000 as well. So casting any Earth summon, you'd actually be able to give a forward plus 3000 power from both of these guys, and if it were an Earth summon that buffs as well, you get that buff on top of it. But if you combine this with a Deleter, which is a combo I have noted before, because it's hilarious, you can cast a summon, and let's say it is a buffing summon, cast that, and say you choose Deleter. Deleter gains plus 1000 power because when he is chosen by a forward or an ability of either your opponent or yourself, he gains 1000. Then use Graviton. He chooses him. He gains another 1000 from that. Then Krile chooses Deleter. Gains another 1000 on top of that. And not to mention the buffs that you also get from Krile, Graviton, and the summon as well. So even just, let's say you go for a summon that buffs by 3000. That, plus Graviton, plus Krile, plus Deleter's own buffs as well, means that he would gain plus 9000, which is hilarious. Yuna, so the cost required to cast your water summons is reduced by 1. This is pretty decent because it means that all your cheap water summons become even cheaper, but you can also trick your opponent as well by having all your water backups dulled, and then you can cast your little, I don't know, Bismarck or Leviathan for only 1 CP with your Earth backups, because Krile allows you to cast summons with any element. Marshery, a similar sort of thing, so she reduces the cost of your summons as well, so you can actually use Yuna and Marshery together, meaning that your water summons will be reduced by 2, which is really good. But you can also remove 3 summons from the break zone to select one of Marshery's abilities, and Krile has the ability to just discard a summon from your hand to be able to make it so Krile cannot be chosen. So you may not even want that effect of making it so that Krile can't be chosen. If you just want to get the summon into your break zone so that you can use Marshery's effect, that's pretty good. Now, bear in mind that if you are doing that for Marshery's effect to reduce a summon's cost by 3, if you're discarding more than 1 card to get that effect, you're actually wasting CP, because obviously that's 2 cards going from hand, which is 4 CP, to reduce a cost by 3 CP. And Une, of course, Une's had a lot of play recently. So when Une enters the field, choose 2 summons with each a different cost in your break zone. Your opponent selects 1 summon among them, and you may cast the other summon without paying the cost. If you cast it, remove the summon from the game instead of putting it into your break zone. Now, obviously, you could put the summons into the break zone to use for Une's cost, but that doesn't matter so much if you're flickering Une as well. So if you were, say, flickering Une and then you could discard a card from your hand into the break zone, that's also decent as well. Krile is a consistent way to be able to get summons you want Une to cast into your break zone ready for when Une enters the field. And similarly, Doga as well. So for every 3 summons in your break zone, Doga gains plus 1000 power, so you can keep on discarding for Krile's ability to make it so that she's harder to kill, but also increases Doga's power as well. And then when Doga attacks, if you have 9 or more summons in your break zone, you may cast one summon from your hand without paying the cost. So again, you could attack with Doga and discard something from your hand to make it so that Doga now can cast a summon from your hand. Ramuh, Lord of Levin. So if you have 2 or more lightning summons in your break zone, Ramuh gains haste. So you may only have the 1 there. And again, this might be a case that you have enough, if you would just discard the cards from hand to be able to play Ramuh onto the field, but maybe you want to surprise your opponent as well. So, you know, you only have the 1 in there with Ramuh, and then you attack with Krile, your opponent blocks, you can then use Krile's ability to discard. She then becomes untargetable, and then Ramuh gains haste as well. Idless, so it might be a 4 CP summon you have in hand and you just want to be able to cast it without having to pay the 4 CP, discard it into your break zone, and then use Idless to then immediately cast that from hand. Cast it from the break zone, sorry. Obviously it removes the summon from the game, so if you're hoping to retrieve it somehow, you're not going to be able to, but still, it's a good way just to be able to discard something and then cast it immediately. Alright, Hein. So, similar sort of thing. Discard 1 card, name 1 element. During this turn, Hein cannot be chosen by summons or abilities of the named element, and if Hein is dealt damage by a summon or an ability of the named element, the damage becomes 0 instead. And then also pay 3 and dull. Choose up to 2 characters, dull them. You can only pay with this with Fire CP, Ice CP, or Lightning CP to use the ability. So he is quite limited in that regard. And to be honest, his pay 3 and dull isn't that good at all. To be able to pay 3 and dull Hein, dull 2 characters, you're effectively paying 2 CP per character being dulled, which isn't amazing, to be honest. But discarding a card to make it so Hein can't be targeted by or damaged by a certain element is quite fun. And fun fact for you, Hein and Hashmal are the only 2 cards on my Hashmal, I think it's Opus 2 or Opus 3 Hashmal, are the only 2 cards in the game that use the keyword name. So discard 1 card, name 1 element, and naming happens at resolution. Now I would have assumed that it happens on casting, so you discard with Hein and then at that point you name an element. No, it is at resolution, so there you go, now you know. But yeah, ultimately it's usable to make it so Hein is harder to kill. So using something like Esha'ntarl, let's say Esha'ntarl is blocking something, going to deal 9k to the board, you can discard a card and say Earth. Now Hein can't be damaged by Earth, and Esha'ntarl will flick around the board, and Hein will be fine. Similar sort of thing with Susano as well, you play Susano onto the field, and then in doing so, you then discard a card to make it so that Hein can't be broken as well, or can't be damaged, sorry. And again, this would remove from the game. Now, obviously, you're paying quite a lot for both Susano or Esha'ntarl as well. Susano more so because it's an entry ability, but still, being able to pay 8 CP and keep 2 forwards on the field, both of which are pretty large and menacing, I think that's a decent and worth it play. Lakshmi, Lady of Bliss. So Lakshmi at the end of the turn will always draw your card, which means that during your opponent's turn you will always have a card to be able to discard for Hein, and not to mention that Lakshmi likes you having lots of cards anyway, and similarly with Hein, so if you need to keep on discarding to keep him alive, it's probably worth it. Cleone. So when either player casts a summon, put Cleone into the break zone. If you do so, cancel the summon's effect. When Cleone is put from the field into the break zone, draw a card. So it means if your opponent were to try and get rid of Hein, and they were to cast a summon to get rid of Cleone get put into the break zone, then draw your card, and then you've got another card in hand to then be able to discard if you wanted, to keep on protecting Hein if you wanted. Thanos, because doubling down on your protection is always worth it, and this kind of bleeds into what I was talking last week about Thanos, in the fact that your opponent has to invest a lot into getting rid of Thanos generally anyway. If there's, board-wide effects, then that kind of sucks. But still, if your opponent wants to target specifically Thanos and break him, then they're going to have to pay a lot. And if they actually want to get rid of Hein, because Hein's being a pain by dulling lots of things, or just, being a large forward, it means that your opponent has to get for Thanos first, to then get rid of Hein, and then obviously you can discard anyway to protect him. And finally, Hope. If you do really want to use Hein's dull ability, you might as well be freezing something as well. So using Hope to make it that you're dulling and freezing 2 characters means that it's much more worth it. And at the end of the day, Hein is dulling 2 characters, so it means that you can dull your opponent's backups as well. And if you were to dull and freeze something and then you had some sort of reactivation, you could use Hope to then reactivate Hein as well, and then dull again to hopefully dull and freeze 2 more things. Okay, Esha'ntarl. Dull, return Esha'ntarl to its owner's hand. Play 1 forward, of course 7 or less other than the card name Esha'ntarl, from your hand onto the field. You can only use this ability during your turn, so no cheating in forwards on your opponent's turn, unfortunately. Again, like last week, it becomes very obvious what card I'm going to combo this with. Leviathan, because Esha'ntarl returns herself to your hand, which then means you get a trigger of Leviathan's minus 9k on something, which is fun. Obviously, it can't play Leviathan onto the field, but still, just being able to play something huge onto the field, and then also getting a minus 9k trigger as well, is going to be probably quite devastating for your opponent. Then, good cards for Esha'ntarl to play. Fusoya. So, Fusoya being able to, hopefully break something is decent, but ultimately it will also get you 2 cards to hand. So, Fusoya comes in, and the words, Esha'ntarl. Esha'ntarl returns to your hand, Fusoya comes in, and then at least gets you 2 cards to hand. You've actually got 3 cards to hand from playing Fusoya onto the field, which is pretty decent. Hopefully Fusoya will have killed something as well, but even still, being able to effectively have paid 4 for Esha'ntarl and then getting 3 cards back to hand is probably worth it. Titan Lord of Crags, because who doesn't want a board wipe? So yeah, being able to play Esha'ntarl onto I'll get it right in a minute. Being able to use Esha'ntarl to play Titan onto the field to just board wipe your opponent is excellent, and you know, if you get to deal your opponent of damage as well, again, worth it. Now this can actually be quite useful because whilst Esha'ntarl can only be used during your turn, you can use it at any point during your turn. So maybe you're attacking with something and you're attacking with a little forward that you're hoping your opponent won't block or has some sort of play in mind. You can then just cheat Titan in during your attack phase with Esha'ntarl to then break all the forwards anyway. Susano, Lord of the Revel. Esha'ntarl comes back to hand, Susano comes in, you then break it back up, you then do -9k, do 9k damage to your opponent's field, or to your field as well, and hopefully get to remove a lot of things. Now, it's worth noting that for what you're doing here, you're paying 4 for Esha'ntarl, and then you can't use her till the next turn anyway. So realistically, you're still paying 4 CP and then waiting on a turn before you can use her ability, to cast something like Susano. But it's worth it if you're getting more value off of it, and whilst Esha'ntarl can play 7 costs, playing 6 CP forwards as well isn't that bad, and if you're combining something like Susano with Garland where you're breaking backups to then get more cards to hand, there's ways to be able to make it so that it becomes more worth it for you. So Wall is a perfect example of that. So you use Esha'ntarl to play Wall onto the field. Wall can then play 1 category Mobius forward from your hand onto the field with no stipulation of cost. So it can play literally any Mobius forward. So we're talking stuff like Yasmat, who's a 9 CP forward, gets to reactivate all your characters or break a forward of 5 CP. You know, there's so much stuff that forward can do. And yeah, there's a lot of good Mobius forwards out there as well. So being able to use Esha'ntarl to play Wall, to play something else, and still have Esha'ntarl back in hand, and maybe more cards as well, who knows. It's just such a good play, and Wall is just a really good card that unfortunately kind of gets overshadowed by the other Wall cards because they do have more static beneficial effects, but still, if you can have only paid 4 for Esha'ntarl and then bring in Wall and something huge, probably pretty good. Red Mage. So I mentioned earlier about you know, you pay 4 CP for Esha'ntarl and then you'd be paying a Lightning and a Dull for Red Mage, which means you've paid 6 CP for a forward to come onto that turn. Well, that's not that great if you're using Esha'ntarl's ability then and there, but it can take your opponent by surprise, and ultimately, if you're playing a 7 CP forward, you have saved yourself a CP at least, and you can play out of colour, which is pretty good as well. So let's say you were to play Esha'ntarl onto the field, use Red Mage to then use Esha'ntarl's ability to play in something like Braska's Final Aeon when you're in an Ice Lightning deck, that can take your opponent by surprise. So being able to play things out of colour immediately on that turn is quite fun. And finally, we have Rosa, and she's a strange card, but a lot of fun, I think. So when you cast the third card you cast this turn, activate all the backups you control. When you cast the 5th card you've cast this turn, reveal the top card of your deck. If it is a character, you may play it onto the field and pay 1 wind. Rosa gains, and Rosa cannot be chosen by your opponent's abilities until the end of the turn. And that's pretty good because you can keep on paying that as many times as you want. So you could pay it immediately, your opponent then reacts by trying to kill her, you can then pay it again, your opponent then reacts again, you can pay it again. So obviously that's quite a lot to have paid, but if you really want Rosa there, then not the worst thing in the world. So something a lot of people get confused about with Rosa is her wording. So when you cast the 3rd card you've cast this turn, activate all the backups you control. Rosa cannot be that 3rd card. The reason for that being is when you cast something, it's not on the field yet. Casting is simply paying the cost of a card, and technically you reveal a card that you're going to play, you pay the cost, and then it enters the field. When the card comes onto the field, it has already been cast. So Rosa's effect of casting that 3rd card has already happened when Rosa comes onto the field. So actually, she doesn't see herself be cast, so she doesn't reactivate all the backups when she enters the field. So you can't play her as the 3rd card to reactivate everything to then keep on playing. So be mindful of that. And the same applies for her 5th as well. You can't play her onto the field as the 5th card and then all of a sudden you get to play something else. Which a lot of people think is not great. I think it's perfectly fine, to be honest. You do need to be mindful of how you pay for things, so in the order in which you're casting things, because if you did think you could play Rosa to activate backups and then play other things, you can't, unfortunately. So, good cast to play with Vaan, because he comes in, plays another forward onto the field, and it plays, not casts, so be careful of that. But ultimately, Vaan can play a backup onto the field, and he does reactivate all your backups as well, which is excellent. So being able to pay for Vaan And let's say you've played Rosa, she's your first cast. You've then played Varn, who then plays another backup on the field. Hopefully, it could be another forward as well. That then reactivates all your backups, so then you're easily going to be able to play cast another thing, which will then reactivate your backups through Rosa's effect. Ochu. When Ochu enters the field, choose up to 2 backups, activate them. This card is just insanely good, just because it reverts its own cost. I mean, technically Ochu from your hand is 2 CP, but its cost is only 1 CP and then it restores 2 CP, so that's really, really good. So you could have played Rosa, played Ochu, that then means Rosa really was only 2 CP, and then you can play something else, you get to reactivate your backups, and there's loads of good things happening. Hope, so whenever you reactivate stuff, you get to reactivate more stuff. Obviously Rosa would reactivate all the backups you control, but with Hope on the field, that could also mean you get to reactivate your forwards as well if you did have them dull for whatever reason. And not to mention the fact that Hope synergizes excellently with other reactivation forms as well, so something like Ochu, for example. You play Ochu onto the field, you get to reactivate 4 backups. Wow, that's really good. Talika, so if you can reduce the costs of all the things you're playing, even better. And obviously Rosa needs you to be playing lots of things on the turn, and similar with Talika, she wants you to be playing lots of things as well. So you combine these two with something like, oh, I don't know, Shikaries, for example, where you start reactivating and paying only 1 CP for stuff. Oh boy, what fun. Edge, so Edge can reduce the cost of all your ninjas as well, but what's more is the fact that Edge can actually make your 1 CP ninjas cost 0. So you could play Rosa onto the field, you could play the Edge onto the field, you could then play a ninja onto the field for free. That would then reactivate all your backups. You could then play another ninja for free. You could then play another ninja for -1 CP, and then you get to hopefully reveal a character from the top of your deck and play that onto the field as well. And, you know, if you're running a ninjas deck, you'll be running a lot of ninjas, therefore a lot of characters, so hopefully Rose will be able to play them onto the field. Maybe it'll be something like, I don't know, Geku or Azayoi, which can actually play more ninjas onto the field from your hand. It's just a great way to be able to flood the field. White Mage, so when White Mage enters the field, choose up to 3 backups you control. If you've cast 3 or more cards this turn, activate them. So, I mentioned earlier about the fact that Rosa wouldn't work when you play her onto the field to activate your backups as the 3rd cast. White Mage, however, would, and the reason for that being is when White Mage enters the field is when her ability triggers. So she would say, oh, I've entered the field now, I get to choose up to 3 backups, which can include herself, and then she looks to see if you cast 3 cards. Turns out you have, you then get to reactivate them. So it's because the fact that White Mage states when she enters the field, whereas Rosa doesn't stay when she enters the field, she states when you cast. So you need to be mindful of that. And similar sort of thing, at the end of each of your turns, you've cast 3 or more cards this turn, draw a card. So not only are you getting rewarded for playing things onto the field for 3 using Rosa, or just reactivating your backups, but also you're drawing a card off of something like Ash as well. Then you've got Alexander, draw 1 card. If you've cast 4 more cards this turn, draw 2 cards instead. Again, just really synergizes in the whole, I'm casting so many things this turn, and Alexander will be the perfect card to cast after you've cast your 3rd, because all your backups would be reactivated, and he's only 1 CP and gets you 2 cards to hand, which would then be another card to cast, and then, you know, just swing away at 5 and hopefully play another thing onto the field for free. And then why not Hope? You know, because that's hilarious. So you could cast Alexander as your 4th cast, which means you've already got all your backups reactivated. You cast Alexander, you get 2 cards to hand. Maybe Hope's already in your hand, maybe you just get Hope to hand with Alexander. You then play Hope onto the field. When Hope enters the field, choose 1 backup you control, activate it. If you've cast a card named Alexander, activate all the backups you control instead. So, for your 5th cast, you know, Alexander could be your 4th, Hope could be your 5th. That would then trigger Rosa to play a character onto the field for free, but would also reactivate all your backups as well with Hope because you've cast Alexander. There's just so many interactions that Rosa synergizes well with in Wind, and it's hilarious. I haven't built a deck around her yet, but I plan to because this is hilarious. Cool, thank you ever so much for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. There are just so many hilarious cards out there to combo, and you know, Opus 15's on the horizon now. All the spoiler season is underway, and my spoiler is coming. I think actually this video will be coming out on the Monday, and my spoiler will be coming out on the same day. So by now my spoiler might have already been revealed. Who knows? Anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.